Hi, and welcome to Divorce Hacker. I'm your host, Ann Grant. On this show, we'll have a variety of guests who've been through divorce and are experts on the topic. Whether you're thinking about a divorce, in the midst of it, or already divorced, we are here to share our stories with you in the hope that you may relate, learn, process, and overcome whatever you're experiencing in your life. Nadine Macaluso is a psychologist, author, internet personality, and a former model. She was married to Jordan Belfort, the notorious Wolf of Wall Street, and she was played by Margot Robbie in the film. After divorcing Belfort, Nadine earned a master's degree and a doctoral degree in counseling and somatic psychotherapy. Her dissertation explored healing relational trauma and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Nadine now works as a therapist in marriage and family counseling and specializes in helping those who are intertwined in trauma bonds. Nadine's book, Run Like Hell, A Therapist's Guide to Recognizing, Escaping, and Healing from Trauma Bonds, has just been released, and it is already a #1 bestseller. It is a groundbreaking work that really every woman should read to arm herself with knowledge and to understand the red flags. And certainly it is a must-read for those who are embroiled in a trauma bond or in recovery. Nadine, welcome to the Divorce Hacker. I'm so excited to have you on our show today.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. I mean, we've been planning this for a while, so I'm glad that we could make it happen.
Me too. And your new book, Run Like Hell, A Therapist's Guide to Recognizing, Escaping, and Healing from Trauma Bonds, was just released.
Yay!
I just got my copy and I was at your book signing last night.
Yeah, thank you.
I know that this has been a labor of love for you over the last several years.
Correct.
Can you talk to us about why you wrote this book?
Sure. So I wrote this book and tortured myself because I had endured a trauma bond early on in my life, not knowing it was that back then to my ex-husband, the Wolf of Wall Street, because we didn't call it that back then, right? But at 39, then I decided to go to school to become a therapist. And as I was dealing with my therapy practice, so many smart, kind, empathetic, beautiful women were coming in trauma bonded. And I was getting actually internally furious and wanted to understand what was actually happening. So like a true academic, I went back to the research and wrote Run Like Hell.
Oh my gosh, we are so blessed to have this book.
Thank you.
Now, a trauma bond is not something that you find in the DSM-5, which is, maybe you can explain for our viewers what the DSM-5 is.
Sure.
And then talk to us a little bit more about what a trauma bond is and why you think it's not included in the DSM.
Sure. So the DSM-5 is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, right? So it's something that we use really for insurance purposes, honestly, just to diagnose people. So it's definitely not in there. And a trauma bond, what it is it's a dysfunctional relationship between two emotionally connected people. And usually there's a perpetrator and a victim. And a trauma bond has to have two conditions. And the way I talk about it in my book is about an intimate love, right? So it can exist in other sorts of relationships, but this book is about intimate love. And it has to have two conditions. It has to have intermittent reinforcement or intermittent abuse, which are fancy psychological jargon, but what it means is that when you're in a trauma bond, you have extreme experience of being love bombed and somebody being helpful and generous to you. But then, paradoxically, you also have extreme experiences of someone being controlling, cruel, and mean, or lying and betraying you. And so it's those extreme experiences that actually create the bond. And the second thing you have to have is a power imbalance. And the power imbalance between two people. And usually, if you're dependent on somebody's resources, there can be a power imbalance. Or if someone has dominated, intimidated, and threatened you, you can fear them so they can have power over you. And it's probably not in the DSM because when we code in the DSM for relationships or couples therapy, we don't get reimbursed.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons. And maybe they wouldn't call it that. They would call it, toxic, dysfunctional relationships, but you don't get reimbursed.
I see. Okay. Well, This is really groundbreaking in my opinion.
Thank you.
And in my practice, I see many women that are suffering from being in a trauma bond.
Sure.
And one of the things I've observed, and I'm sure you have too, is it seems sort of inexplicable that these women will return to their abuser.
Yes.
Oftentimes they're experiencing verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and sometimes it even turns into physical abuse.
Sure.
I've had instances where I've obtained domestic violence restraining orders in these situations.
Yeah.
And these women will go back to their abuser. Can you explain? It's sort of a mind twister for me why that happens when smart women do that.
Yeah, well, the research shows that women will go back to their abuser 4 to 7 times before they actually leave. And there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the main reasons, well, first of all, it could be economic dependence, children. Those are two obvious reasons. But a lot of times they're very confused and they've been brainwashed. And there's a symptom called cognitive dissonance that is caused by a trauma bond. So if we go back to the extreme intermittent abuse, right? You're dealing with 2 different people, you think, in your mind, because we call it Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. You think you're dealing with a good guy and a bad guy. So you can imagine in somebody's brain, they're like, wait, is he good or bad? Is the relationship good or bad? Am I crazy? Is he actually telling the truth? And so the cognitive dissonance causes so much confusion and it wipes out your executive functioning. You literally can't think straight because all these thoughts are always ping-ponging around in your brain. And so it can be very hard to plan, to strategize, to organize, to leave. And then you have a highly manipulative person saying to you, come back to me. I made a mistake. I'll go to therapy. I'll stop drinking. I'll change. So it's a very complex process to escape.
That is certainly true. I didn't realize that it takes 4 to 7 times, but that I've seen that reflected in my practice, and that's helpful to know.
Yeah.
So what can we do, those of us who want to be supportive?
Yeah.
If we have a friend or even a client in that situation, or a family member, a sister, for example, a girlfriend that we want to support. And I think what I've observed is people after a while will sort of dip out. They'll just reach their tolerance of hearing the same story over and over.
They've had it.
They've seen that behavior over and over.
Yeah.
I think it's important, and we'll talk about this, or I'd like you to address it, that these gals seek help from a qualified mental health professional who has training in this, like yourself. So if you could talk to us about that.
It's a really tricky, slippery slope because in therapy, you want to give the woman or anybody agency, right? To be an agent of their life, to make the choices in their life. But again, if their executive functioning isn't great and if their self-esteem is so low from being beaten down emotionally and psychologically by somebody, the way I work is I'm pretty direct with them. And I think it's a nice thing for them, if they don't have a therapist, to have like an accountability person that they call anytime when they're going to go back, that a person can literally name the facts. Because we want to stay away from feelings and thoughts when we're in this process of leaving, because we can't always believe our thoughts and the feelings can be very confusing. And so facts, could I be myself? No. Was he super controlling? Yes. Did he gaslight me? Did he cheat on me? Did he betray me? Right? And so going back to the facts over and over again can help the person. But again, we really can't control what they do, as we both know. Well, we've been in a lot of cases where people have gone back. We've done our best work, and then inevitably it is their life. But I do believe that working with the facts, and that's why I wrote the book, being educated can support your empowerment to leave.
That's really helpful, going back to the facts.
Yeah.
Because what I have found in working with women in this situation is, and it's frustrating, is they will start to believe their abuser.
Yes.
And so, and they can get very twisted around about what the facts are.
Yeah.
Like you said, their executive functioning, their judgment, their decision making is super impaired. My experience with this is that, there's fight, flight, and freeze.
Yeah.
And the thing that I see the most commonly in these situations is freeze.
Yeah,
Avoidance.
Yeah.
And you talk in your book about a number of avoidance behaviors, including numbing behaviors. So we see women in these situations who are drinking more than they should, or just not showing up for their appointments.
Yes, not making the phone calls, right?
Not moving down the path to get to the light at the end of the tunnel, which I think is really challenging. And I think the way that you've outlined this in your book, sort of from the beginning to the end of the journey, is really helpful. You talk about a lot of supportive practices for women going through this. Can you address some of those for us?
Yeah. So, when you think about it, a trauma bond is traumatic. So trauma means anything that's like outside the realm of normalcy, right? And this relationship is outside the realm of normalcy. So you will have the woman, right, myself included, I had it, will have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so you're traumatized. You have symptoms of being traumatized, and which are shame and hopelessness and avoidance and depression and all the things we talk about. So when you've been traumatized, the first thing you have to do is stabilize before you begin anything. And that happens with self-care. And it sounds so like rudimentary, right? But it's super important. What are you eating? How are you sleeping? You must exercise. You must be in therapy. You must be journaling. You must be meditating. You must be doing these things that ground you and center you, because you can't even begin to deal with leaving, deal with your divorce attorney, deal with your kids, deal with life if you're not stabilized.
Yeah, no, I think that's critical. I know for myself, that was how I was able to move out of a situation where I needed to move out. Yeah, was by implementing those seemingly rudimentary but so very important practices.
So important.
The yoga practice is helpful because it helps you ground down and get back in your body and out of your head.
Yes.
And what I found in working with women in this situation, I know this for myself too, is it's like there's like a loop in your brain.
Yes.
That's kind of trying to talk you out of moving forward. And so I think it's really helpful to implement the breathing practices. I know you're trained in somatic therapy, like those practices that get us back into our body.
Yes, to get yourself out of your head. And also, it's scary.
Yeah, very scary.
It's scary. And so routine helps us also deal with anxiety.
Right.
So we need like simple routine, and it's hard because, if you are dealing with a very toxic person that you're trying to divorce, post-separation abuse happens.
Oh, it's the worst.
Yeah, it can be the scariest time, Matt.
Right. Truly.
That's why they don't leave. That's why I didn't leave.
Yes. Yeah. How did you finally get up, without knowing all this and all the training, how did you finally get up the courage to leave?
Well, I always say I could thank the United States government for helping me with that, because my ex-husband had an ankle bracelet on because he got arrested. And I always say to women, in some ways I had it easier because of that.
You had some help.
I had some help. And so that gave me the courage to leave because I knew I was safe.
Right.
I knew I was safe because these men are very powerful, often very scary, very controlling, and they're not nice to you when you're in the marriage. What do you think's going to happen when you leave?
Yeah. I've seen this a lot with the people that I work with.
Right? And then they're confused, like, he's being so mean. He was a jerk when you were married to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how I had the courage to leave. I had it, and he was contained, so I could leave.
Yeah. Now, we've worked with clients together, and we've had instances where other mental health professionals have been involved, and it was evident that they didn't have the skill set that you do with respect to understanding a trauma bond.
Yeah.
We've observed mental health professionals concluding that our clients were engaging in, I think they called it learned helplessness. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a real pet peeve of mine, as you know.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, abuse is always the fault of the abuser.
Right.
And I really wanted to take the shame and the self-blame and the stigma off of the victim, because we are so mean to the victim.
Yeah.
You know, and we say you're codependent, you have learned helplessness, you're an enabler. Who wants to enable an abuser to abuse them?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. So, I mean, using these terms that put them down and disempower them, what's that going to do for them when they're up for the fight of their life?
Right.
Right? And so I'm more strength-based, and I'm more like, okay, let's see what your personality traits are, what your attachment pattern, who you are. Let's see the strengths that we can focus on to help you get out. Mm-hmm. And let's build up the ones that you don't have.
Right.
Or let me teach you to the capacity that I can, the ones that you don't have, right? And then also validating that.
Right.
Like, yeah, this is incredibly hard. What you've endured was terrible.
Yeah, I think it's so important because I remember when I was going through my divorce, encountering this notion of, well, it takes two to tango. And that is sort of the presumption that I think the populace comes into every divorce with. And even we've experienced mental health professionals.
Yes.
And it can be very counterproductive in helping these gals get out of an abusive situation, because sometimes there isn't physical violence, which of course, you know, when there is, it sort of ratchets everything up. Everybody seems to understand.
Yes.
And the court system does as well, that,
correct,
you know, that's just not okay. And that, you know, steps will be taken that are much different when the abuse is either emotional or verbal.
Yes.
But a lengthy period of time of emotional abuse can be as or more destructive, I think, for a woman in terms of her not seeking her freedom from a very bad situation.
Yes.
And it isn't really fully recognized, even within the mental health community, in a way that you have.
Yeah, and I guess that's where, you know, personal experience helps. You know, because when I left my ex-husband, everybody, because he was such a substance abuser, everybody was just like, you're codependent and you're an addict.
Right.
And I was like, I think there's something more going on here. But even the professionals I was working with, and this was a long time ago, you know, that's what they told me. And not that that didn't help me a little bit, but I was like, of course, I'm codependent, it's my fault.
Yeah.
You know, and not that we all shouldn't take accountability for our part in things. And of course, like I learned a lot about myself through going to therapy, but it was the wrong label. I'm not codependent.
No, you're not.
I have avoidant attachment. I'm very self-reliant. And so it just was a misdiagnosis. And it's not even in the DSM anyway. So it's as slippery as a horoscope, actually, we've discovered. And it didn't do me any good. And it doesn't do these women any good. And, you know, when we talk about the courts, I just learned, and I don't know if this is in California, maybe Pickey's law or something, Pickey's law, but coercive control now is finally recognized in some states as bad as physical violence. I think there's 3 states.
That's wonderful.
So that's great. So that's forward movement.
Yeah.
Because men realized, I guess it was in the 1970s, that if they hit us, they went to jail.
Right.
So now they moved into these tactics that they couldn't go to jail for.
Right. That's right. Yeah. No, that's amazing. That's real progress.
That's real progress.
Yeah,
right?
it really is. It's probably challenging to prove as a lawyer when you're in court, where's the evidence?
Right.
And so that, of course, is the challenge.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about, I was really interested in reading your book to learn that traits of agreeableness, cooperativeness, like all these things that make us likable, lovable,
good
successful in relationships, typically, can be used against us when we're dealing with someone who is, do you call it a pathological lover?
That's
okay.
right.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so in 2018, I read Sandra L. Brown's book, Women Who Love Psychopaths. And that, I'm forever grateful to her. That just changed everything for me because she was the first one that did all the research. She worked with these women who were lawyers, who were judges, who were doctors. They weren't the women in the domestic violence shelters. And she was like, wait, there's something different happening here because these women are still in trauma bonds. She didn't call them that. She calls them, I think, pathological love relationships. They're still in abusive relationships. So she did years and years of research, and she found, she used a personality test called the Big Five, and it measures personality traits of agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness to experience, neuroticism, and extroversion. So she tested those 5 traits, and what she found was that women that ended up in trauma bonds, the majority of them scored very high in agreeableness and very high in conscientiousness, which means they're loyal, they're tolerant, they're kind, they're altruistic, they're pro-relational, they're organized, they're diligent, and they have integrity.
Wow.
And
they're basically just really good, solid people.
Yeah. And so she breaks down why agreeableness isn't codependency. And so she goes very deep into the research. And so I actually acquired the test, and I have all my patients take it. And I score very high in agreeableness and very high in conscientiousness. And I was like, okay, there we go. So all these traits that I had, which if a woman comes to me and she's kind and loyal and tolerant and loves relationships, I'm not going to therapize those out of her.
Right. Of course not.
Why would I do that? But in a trauma bond with a pathological lover, they get weaponized and used.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a huge part of my book.
Yeah.
Now, from my own experience, I did find there were other personality traits too, mixes of them. And I talk about that. So I think it's important for women to know what their personality traits are. Some women who were abused score this way. I break it up into 3 different categories. But the high thing that you see across all of the categories, no matter what the woman is, she scores very high in tender-mindedness, all the women, which means they're very empathetic.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, too, because with the women I work with, and even in my own situation, if someone is suffering from, if your spouse or partner is suffering from some sort of, I won't say disability, but let's say he's a substance abuser.
Yeah.
Or he has a mental health issue or some other issue.
Right.
That's, causing him to act out.
Yeah.
We want to believe they can get better.
Yeah.
Especially when we have children.
Of course.
We want to give them the benefit of the doubt. We want to do the right thing.
That's right.
We don't typically give up.
That's right. Not conscientious women. They think they could do anything.
And so what I hear you saying is all of those attributes, which typically are very helpful in moving our lives forward and building relationships, in this particular situation can be problematic for someone in that. Okay.
Correct.
Got it.
So like if a woman comes to me and she has high agreeable and high conscientiousness and she's leaving, I say, okay, we're going to put the agreeableness on the side. We're not going to lean into your agreeableness right now. That's not going to do you any good. We're going to lean into the conscientious part of you. Because I always tell them that conscientious part's going to get you through.
Oh, I love that.
right? You're going to be disciplined. You're going to be orderly. You're going to show up on time. You're going to present good to the judge, but that's what we're going to lean into, because the agreeableness
Is not helpful right
is
now.
not helpful right now with your mother and your sister,
Yeah,
but not with this guy.
that's right. What advice do you have for someone watching this right now
Yeah.
who, through either reading your book or listening to you, the light bulbs starting to go off
Good.
of, yeah, oh my God,
Yeah.
maybe that's what's going on for me. Maybe I'm not just codependent or
Right.
enabling.
Yeah.
How would you recommend they go about seeking a really good therapist?
Yeah.
Since, there are only so many hours in the day for you to work with people, who's trained in a way that can facilitate them doing whatever it is that they need to do.
Yeah. And I have a list in my book too, right? I definitely think getting a trauma-informed therapist is super important because you have been traumatized, and there is a different treatment for someone who comes in with just, I don't want to say simple, but anxiety or depression and has gone through chronic relational trauma as you have. So it's very important to find a trauma-informed therapist and just keep getting educated and learn about your attachment pattern, learn about your personality traits, right? We've been so focused on our partner when we've been in a trauma bond, really turn the mirror back on you and surround yourself with like-minded individuals, right? That really get it. And any good therapist, even if they're not as trained in this as I am, if they're a good therapist and they're trauma-informed, they'll be willing to learn.
Right.
Right? Because we're therapists. We like to learn.
Right.
Right. But that's what I would suggest, and really resourcing yourself. So, with friends, with your mental health, with your physical health, with your emotional health, with your spiritual health.
Right.
Really build up those resources and stay away from substances.
That's good advice.
I know you want to numb out. I've been there. I've done it.
Right.
It did me no good.
Yeah.
It was much better when I woke up clear-headed, approached what I had to do, faced my fears. Right?
Yeah. It's hard.
And that doesn't mean I didn't slip back.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And also how you talk to yourself, because you've been so criticized and controlled and abused. Really having a lot of self-compassion, which I write about. Speaking to yourself kindly, like, you can do this. We got this. And the research shows speaking to yourself in the mirror really nicely works.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And like kind of being your own inner parent.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
I think for many of these women, in working with them, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but to follow up with what you just said, is sometimes there's a childlike quality to them where it almost feels like there's a lack of maturation.
Yes.
And an unwillingness to, or a reticence to move out of the difficult relationship.
Yeah.
Because there's sort of this patriarchal authority situation happening where they're being told what to do. Often they're being taken care of financially.
Yeah.
And so I think that this notion of maybe some inner child work, where they can learn to mature and understand that they can take care of themselves, that they're a grown woman, could be tremendously helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And the number one symptom, aside from CPTSD, is loss of self.
Yeah.
Right? Because these relationships and these men really strip you of your sense of self. Because if you don't have a sense of self, you're easier to control.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's really gaining that sense of self back, which is a process. So they have to be patient.
Yeah, that is true.
Right? And lean into people, I always say I'm in the emotional emergency room doing emotional triage work. I mean, we've talked to our patients and clients on the weekends. I mean, there is a lot of hand-holding, and we're there to do it. But inevitably, not your therapist, your lawyer, your priest, they're not going to save you.
That's right. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah, and you can.
That's right.
We're living examples of it.
Right. It's possible.
It's possible. And that's just, again, but I also tell them where there's fear, there's transformation.
Oh, I like that.
You know,
Yeah.
if you face those fears, you'd be surprised what's on the other side.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, it really is possible to walk forward through your fear and pretty quickly come to the realization that you were a much stronger person and better off as a result of having done that, rather than choosing to stay in a situation that's known but not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, when I was leaving my ex, or I always say this to myself, you know, I found out that playing it safe was the most dangerous thing to do.
Right.
It's like, oh, it's safer. He's rich. He'll take care of me. I won't have a care in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, the complete opposite was true.
Yeah. The complete opposite. You were the best bad example of that, or good example of the extremity of that. But that, to a lesser extent, is often the case.
Yeah.
It's like a smokescreen of security.
Right. And it's just not.
You know, I think you talked about this in your book. This was true for me. It's been true working with a lot of clients. I have found that sometimes if they're really stuck and can't take the step forward to do what they need to do for themselves, it can be effective to draw attention to the adversity that their children are facing.
Yes.
So I think you talked about in your book your experience with your daughter. I had a similar experience with mine, where a friend of mine actually said to me, hey, if you can't do this for yourself, you need to do it for your daughter. And that was my wake-up call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have that experience?
Yeah, you know, I write about that there are different reasons why women leave, right? And I think children, wanting to take care of children and do it for your children is a great way to think of it as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, as we know, it works and it makes a lot of sense.
Well, you think about the role modeling that you're creating for a daughter, for example, to stay in an abusive relationship.
Because, you know, now I watch my daughter, she's a therapist, and she just had a baby. And so her and her husband and her baby stayed with us for 12 days. And to watch her and her partner be true partners, 50-50 with this baby, I was like, okay, we did it.
Oh, I have chills.
Yeah.
Good job, Mom.
Yeah. And to see that was just the most beautiful gift.
Right.
Yeah. That, you know, and that's evolution. Like,
you've reversed the cycle.
Yeah. For now. Let's hope it stays.
So speaking of which, you talk in your book about what I'll call the silver lining. And I think what you said is that 75% of women who go through this come out stronger. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was an amazing statistic that I found, which specifically with this sort of trauma, let's just say domestic violence, right? Domestic abuse, interpersonal violence, trauma bonds, 75% will grow from the trauma.
That's amazing.
Yeah, meaning they'll find meaning in it, and that's not toxic positivity, because when you're going through it, I mean, so many people like, no, really, Nadine?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let me pull that back. But that you might find, like, first of all, you get to know yourself more, right? You might find a strength you didn't know you had. You might connect more to your spirituality. You might connect more to the greater meaning of life. You know, there are a lot of different things that can happen from this.
You might publish a book that wakes everybody up.
Oh, you're right. Right. You just never know.
You never know.
You never know. And now when you're in the trauma vortex, that is so hard to see.
Right.
It is so hard to see, but there is hope.
Oh, I love that.
Because we've taken a lot of women to the other side.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's been so great to have you on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God, I could talk to you for hours.
We could, truly.
But we have to stop.
Yeah. Thank you for coming and for sharing with us and for bringing this book into the world. I know it's going to help so many women, and I'm just so grateful that you're here today.
Oh, thanks, Ann. You know I love you.